Sarah, thanks so much for doing this and you representing Barista Magazine, obviously, and being part of our fourth annual virtual caffeine crawl. Barista Magazine has been a part of every caffeine crawl event, but it's fun because we actually get to interview you. So it's kind of a flip side of what you do professionally. So I'm excited to dive in, ask you some fun and maybe challenging questions, and having you share with our audience, which is a big part of your audience. So very exciting. So again, thanks.
My name is Sarah Allen. I am the editor and co founder of Barista Magazine, which is a publication for the international specialty coffee community. Our readers are independent cafe owners in 86 countries. And we have been publishing 6 times per year in print since 2005.
All right, question number one, Sarah. Um, what has been your wildest coffee related trip ever? Tell us about that trip.
There have been some doozies, but I would have to say the wildest one was it was around 2015, and Dalla Corte Espresso Machines invited me to join a group of baristas from all over the world um, in going to Indonesia to visit a coffee project they have there called Orangutan Coffee. The palm oil industry is really devastating the landscape around the coffee growing areas in Sumatra and throughout Indonesia. Um, so they've created this program to work with coffee farmers throughout those areas who would commit to growing coffee rather than cutting down their coffee fields to grow palm oil trees, which gives a huge return on the first harvest, but then there's rarely a second harvest because those trees so devastate the soil. So the other reason that it is so awful, though, is because by cutting down those farmlands throughout Indonesia, they are taking away the habitat for endangered orangutans. So this project is at its heart meant to keep those communities of orangutans alive and thriving. So we flew into Medan, Indonesia, and it was, for me, it was a 52-hour journey. I went the wrong way around the earth. And so I flew from Portland to San Francisco, San Francisco to Dubai, Dubai to Kuala Lumpur, and Kuala Lumpur to Medan, Indonesia. So I was very out of it when I got there. It was incredibly hot, as it would be for the whole trip. The group that I was with was amazing. Just barista champions from Denmark, Poland, Iran, Mexico, Colombia, Netherlands. Really, it was about 20 of us there, and I was super lucky to be there. So um, everything got really wild the next day because we were taking off to go visit the first of the orangutan nurseries where these orangutan babies who've been orphaned live and are taken care of by rehab specialists. That was really cool. The next day, we got on buses and we drove way up into the jungle to this little community called Bukit Lawang, and we stayed there for about 4 days. And one of the days we hiked up into the jungles to see the orangutans in the trees. This is coffee related, but it's also animal related. I'm a pretty insanely animal loving person. But seeing all that up close and seeing the reaction from the coffee community, I love coffee people so much because they do tend to be empathetic and curious and smart and driven to make the world a better place. So these baristas, it was hitting them hard what was happening while we were there. We also went on to drive through palm oil tree forest, not forest because they're all invasive species, but um, and see the production and what a large scale it's on. There's palm oil in pretty much every product you use in your home, from your shampoo to your uh, peanut butter. I mean, it's really in everything. So we ended up going, everything got like wilder and wilder as the trip went on. We after that day in the jungle and the time at Bukit Lawang, we went on to a different little village where we had to, like, with our bags, swim with our bags over our heads, across a river, and then climb this muddy slope to the top where we were going to camp out there. It was so hot and humid. We had to choose every day if we were going to put on bug spray or sunscreen, because you needed both, but it just never even mattered for me because I was sweating so much the whole time that I just was constantly wiping off my face. Um, we went across those like rope bridges across insanely deep valleys. Felt very dangerous. Everything felt pretty dangerous, but it was also this wild adventure. And then we went up to Sumatra and we visited producers and we got to see their farms, and we also got to talk to them on a personal level about why being involved in the orangutan coffee program was so important to them. So that's a long answer to your question.
What is your favorite issue or one of your favorite issues that you would like to talk about?
Um, I actually kind of like to say that the current issue is my favorite because, first of all, I'm really personally tied to it. And secondly, um, I hope that we get better and better with every issue. We have some, like, there are issues from our first few years that I can't even look at. I just, it's like, I just look at it and am critical of it. So I do like to think we're getting better and better with every issue. There are some cover stories that we've had in the last year that are especially important to me. My dear friend Sam Lowe, who was actually also on that trip to Indonesia, he is a former New Zealand barista champion, latte art champion, all around badass. And he also is like this incredible chef, and he did a cooking program called Master Chef New Zealand during COVID, and he won the whole thing. And so we had him on the cover of our February March 2023 issue, talking about the journey from coffee to food and back again, which was really interesting. We also talked about how the coffee community has empowered him to come out to his family and his friends as queer. And he's really using his status as the Master Chef winner to be an advocate for queer rights throughout New Zealand and Australia. So I'd say, I guess that one is like a current favorite issue.
If you had it to do all over again, what is the first thing you would change or do differently when starting Barista Magazine? I know personally for me, I wish I would have stocked up, stored up a little bit more of a small business savings plan before jumping in. So I'm curious for you, for Barista Magazine, what would you, if you could go back and redo, what would you do differently?
I talked to my partner, Ken, my husband, who is also my business partner. We started Barista Magazine together in 2004. First issue was printed in 2005. I talked to him about this question, and he said, what would we, it's not that we would do anything differently. It's that if we had any idea how hard it would be and how stressful and uh, it was so hard to start this magazine. Um, for the first few years, we didn't take a paycheck for the first 4 years Barista Magazine was in business, and very little after that. This is like all things in coffee. There are very few people who make a lot of money, but you're doing it because your heart's in it. Um, so Ken has said, if we knew all that beforehand, we probably wouldn't have started the magazine. And it's just a weird question because, I don't know, we did it because we were fearless. We did it because we just were ready to take a risk. And granted, let me tell you that starting a magazine is not as risky as opening a cafe because we have always worked out of our home. We have very, very limited staff. Most of our contributors, writers, and photographers and artists are contract. And so we don't have to we don't have like a property that we have to take care of and have, health codes and stuff like that. Our house is very clean, but we have dogs running around, which you can't have in a cafe. Um, anyway, we were young and broke. We started Barista magazine with loans from our very kind parents, which we have paid back, on credit cards. Yeah, we've never had an investor. We've never carried debt after we paid all that stuff off, which we're really proud of. We didn't know who could do what. I was the one with ties to the coffee industry. We're both professional journalists by education, but we had no idea that, I would eventually be doing ad sales in addition to all the creative stuff, and Ken would be handling all the finances and administration stuff, subscriptions. Um, and we both really have thrived in our roles, and we also have really balanced each other out. And so I just feel like we're incredibly lucky. We were newly engaged when we started the magazine, and I've seen a lot of couples who start businesses together fall apart, and we're very, very lucky that that hasn't happened to us. It's just made us stronger. So I don't know if I really answered that question, but that's a little bit about the early days.
So, what in your background led to this career path for you? Obviously, none of us went to college for specialty coffee, although a lot of us drank tons of specialty coffee in college. But what was it for you? What were those turning points in your life that kind of led you to doing this professionally?
Path. Good question. Like I said, Ken and I are both professional journalists. I worked for newspapers in the Bay Area in California, as well as in Portland, Oregon. I was a staff writer for the Oakland Tribune and the Oregonian newspaper. I never, I always loved coffee. I grew up in Berkeley, California, going to Pete's Coffee when it was still independent. Um, but I was a journalist, and I went to graduate school for journalism, and I got very interested in subcultures. And I was writing about kids and kids' issues primarily, which is interesting because I don't have any kids. Um, and then newspapers started to die. This was back in 2000, and uh, I met Ken. We both sort of veered from our career paths, and then I got a job at a magazine that was about coffee, which no longer is in circulation. It's called Fresh Cup. I think they have a website. Anyway, I was the editor there, and we had this. It was so crazy. Like, that was the only magazine really that was really trying to connect with the independent specialty coffee community at that time. But I was just totally interested in baristas. I thought that they were fascinating, and they reminded me a lot of artists and musicians and people that I'd written about in the past. Um, and I was like, this coffee magazine seems super niche, but the baristas are a niche within the niche. So I was watching that closely. Ken and I were like, well, we could start our own magazine. We'd both worked for corporate companies before that, but working at that magazine, I saw that, like, you can be a dreamer. Coffee people tend to be dreamers, and you can just go out and try something. And so I worked at a coffee company in Seattle for like a year, just sort of to be in the coffee community inside rather than as a writer outside, which was very, very helpful. Worked for them for a year, and then we started Barista Magazine, and that was that.
Okay, you got to give us a little bit of juice about the industry. I know a lot of people come to you. We get the same thing. We hear a lot of secrets. We hear a lot of transactions, buyouts. companies going under or shutting down their brick and mortar and stuff like that, and we keep it to ourselves and can't really share and respect those that information that's passed on to us. So for you, what can you share with us that's a little juicy about the industry? And you don't have to give any names, but any kind of story um, or information that you can share with us. All right. Thanks a lot, Sarah. Really appreciate you being a part of this. Thanks for your time and everything.
Oof, I have heard some juicy secrets over the years, and I can't name names. Uh, I think that back in the day, back in the 2000s, I went to some pretty wild holiday parties that coffee companies would have. Um, I don't know why they invited us. I mean, people always say to me, "This is off the record," and I always say, "Everything's off the record until I tell you it is on the record." I'm not fishing for juice. That's not the kind of magazine we are. We celebrate people in coffee rather than try and catch them doing something wrong. But I have certainly seen a lot of weird stuff. I've traveled with a lot of roasters to coffee producing countries, and that's a trip because a lot of them will um, sort of adopt an alter ego when they're traveling. So at home they might be like a family person and you know 9 to 5, and but then when they go on a trip, especially if they don't travel very often, they sometimes go off the rails. And in terms of partying, in terms of just acting differently. Um, yeah, I guess that's all the juice I can share right now. Um, but I don't know, the coffee industry is, I think it's different than other industries because people do tend to be more kind to each other. Um, every industry has its bad eggs, but I feel like we have a relatively small number of them in coffee. I've talked to people who work in lots of different industries, and they're always really amazed that it's so much a part of our lives, Ken's and my life, and also friends I have. I mean, some of my very, very closest friends are coffee people. I would say all of the people in my life, besides all of my closest friends are coffee people. I have some of my closest friends live halfway around the world, and I sometimes see them more times in a year because I travel so much than I see some of my non-coffee friends. Um, yeah, so Jason Burton, Caffeine Crawl. I remember when he started Caffeine Crawl, I'd known him for several years before that when he was working for a roaster. And he had a dream and he was fearless and he excuse me, he took a risk and did it. And look at it now. Caffeine Crawl is one of my absolute favorite uh, organizations, events in the coffee world because it makes coffee so accessible for people. It brings professionals and consumers together, which I think can be incredibly helpful for there not to be that counter between them, for them to actually be learning and experiencing something together. I think it opens professionals' eyes to really see what consumers are thinking or what's grabbing them when you stop at a cafe. It opens consumers' eyes to actually be talking to a professional, and maybe it'll engage them more in the coffee industry. Um, and I love that Jason celebrates small communities, you know, because there are big trade shows, but they always happen in big cities. And Caffeine Crawl goes everywhere and celebrates coffee culture everywhere. And it is a large part of the reason that our community has grown so massive in parts of the country that 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought would be receptive to specialty coffee. So, shout out to Jason Burton at Caffeine Crawl. Barista Magazine loves you, and we will support what you do forever and ever. Thanks for including me in your virtual crawl.